It was a record-breaking presidential election. 2.4 million votes were cast that year. And over the past 50 presidential elections, this election ranks overall number 3 in voter participation at 80.1%. After this election, all of the rules were rewritten in presidential campaigning. Who was this candidate? What carnival tactics was he accused of using? And how did it forever change presidential campaigning? Are you ready? Let's do it. Some have called the presidential election of 1840 the Carnival election. Democrats claim that the Whig Party and William Harrison were using carnival tactics to dupe voters. The image marketing, the parades, the bands, the float. The Harrison campaign rewrote all of the rules in presidential campaigning in this election. There was a lot of campaign first. First of all, they rewrote the rules for presidential candidate marketing. And they successfully crafted the image of Harrison in a way that had never been done before. Now, the Democrats negatively attempted to portray Harrison as an old, poverty-stricken, alcoholic presidential candidate. Some old guy sitting in his log cabin drinking hard cider. Well, instead of being reactionary to the accusations, the Harrison campaign actually embraced them and turned them around on the Democrats. The whole log cabin issue, they simply used to draw Harrison closer to that generation, some of which were born in log cabins in the early founding of our country. The whole hard cider image, they believe would help him identify with a common man, with the average hardworking America. And they marketed him and his image on literally everything, from campaign ribbons to campaign coins to campaign flags to these log cabin whiskey bottles that were produced, log cabin pictures, and even some of the women's handkerchiefs had the image of William Harrison. The Harrison campaign also had the first famous campaign slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. The Whigs took a play from the Democratic playbook. And the Democrats had previously chosen a war hero, Andrew Jackson, who got twice elected president, and they decided to do the same thing in this election, but with William Harrison. The Tippecanoe is just simply there to remind voters about Harrison's victory over Tecumseh and the Shawnee Indians at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. The Tyler, too, is in reference to John Tyler, who was his vice presidential running mate, former governor from the state of Virginia. But this slogan was memorable, easy to remember, and it really resonated with voters. Today, no major presidential candidate runs for office without really coming up with a good slogan. And that slogan will help define the candidate and also help really demonstrate what they stand for. Stop and think about Franklin Roosevelt running for president the very first time up against the Great Depression. And their campaign slogan was, "Happy days are here again." Or you stop and think about Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s and how they marketed "I like Ike" on literally everything. And then you stop and think about "Make America Great Again," which was made famous twice by Donald Trump. But Donald Trump wasn't the first one to use it. Actually, the first one to use that campaign slogan was Ronald Reagan. But here's the truth about Harrison. If we were to take Harrison and hook him up to a polygraph to get the truth out of him, here's what we would find out. First of all, Harrison was not born in a log cabin, and he certainly wasn't born into poverty. He was born into wealth. Berkeley Plantation, which sat on 1,400 acres. The image of him being coming from poverty really wasn't the truth. And then you stop and think about the whole hard cider thing. Harrison wasn't a hard drinker, and he rarely drank. He once owned a whiskey distillery, but he closed it down, and he said he regretted ever opening it. And he said that whiskey was destructive to health and happiness. And he had this aversion to alcohol probably because his own son, William Harrison Jr., became an alcoholic. He ran up a bunch of debt, and he died at the young age of 36 years of age, and he left behind a wife and 2 children. Are you getting some value from what you're watching right now? Hey, take a second, hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, do that now. Tapping that notification bell alerts you whenever we have some new updated content. Do us a huge favor. Share our videos with your friends and family to kind of help us get word out about press politics and help us grow our channel. There's another way that the Harrison campaign rewrote the rules. The Harrison campaign also rewrote the rules for presidential campaign messaging. The Harrison campaign put together, in a very effective way, an organized grassroots effort to get out the vote. They use a national newspaper. They used the first national newspaper to get out their messaging. And I think this ended up becoming the very first viral presidential campaign in U.S. history. The name of the newspaper was called The Log Cabin. And it was published by Horace Greeley of the New York Tribune. And you can see prominently at the very top of that newspaper, they used the logo of a log cabin and a hard cider barrel and a flagpole that said Harrison and Tyler. And this very first printing was like initially 40,000 copies, and later it ended up being as much as 60,000 that were being printed and distributed nationally. But they used this log cabin newspaper to get out a wide variety of topics, to really get out their messaging. Tippecanoe clubs were organized by the Whigs in this election to get out the vote for Harrison. And they were held in log cabins in local communities that were built by local people. And it's in these Tippecanoe clubs that they organized grassroots efforts to get out the vote for Harrison on Election Day. And they organized parades throughout the country for Harrison. And many of these parades had marching bands, and they had floats, and they had these log cabins that were carried through these floats on wagons. They gave out hard cider in these parades. They also got celebrities involved in this presidential election. And one of them was Big Jim Porter, the Kentucky Giant, who was 7 foot 8 inches tall. And he'd march in these parades with his hunting shirt on and his coonskin cap, carrying a rifle over his shoulder. And stop and think about all of the celebrities that are used in presidential campaigns today. But the Harrison campaign also rewrote the rules on presidential candidate campaigning. Harrison was the first presidential candidate to really actively campaign for himself. Martin Van Buren absolutely refused to go out and campaign for himself. And at this time, he was just simply carrying on the tradition from past presidents, going all the way back to George Washington. And it was thought to be too arrogant or presumptuous or egotistical to go out and campaign for yourself. You let other surrogates go out and do that. But Harrison broke the mold, and he rewrote the rules. He went out on the stump, and he gave about 24 speeches during that election cycle. Some of these speeches lasted from 1 to 2 hours long. He drew in huge crowds, thousands of people at a time, and some of these parades were miles and miles long. Harrison learned how to entertain crowds. And Harrison brought entertainment into presidential campaigning. And stop and think about all of the entertainment and the element of entertaining that is used at presidential rallies even today. On one instance, Harrison was passed a jug of hard cider, and he took several swigs to the delight of the crowd, all of it being staged. He knew how to make a grand entrance when he was campaigning. And sometimes he would ride in on a white horse, or he would come in dramatically in a horse-drawn carriage that would be brought right up to the stage. And stop and think about how many candidates are able to do that even today. You know, Harrison worried that he was setting a precedent for future candidates by actively campaigning. And he said, "Sometimes I fear that upon me will fall the responsibility of establishing a dangerous precedent to be followed in future times." When the election results came in 1840, Harrison ended up winning 234 electoral votes. He carried 19 of the 26 states. 2.4 million votes were cast, and it was number 3 overall in voter participation at 80.1%. The Whigs, more importantly, got control of both houses of Congress. And unfortunately, Harrison only lived 31 days in office, and he is the shortest living president to serve in office to date. And while he is the shortest living president, he for certain rewrote the rules on presidential campaigning and has made an impact on campaigning even till today.